Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. We're expecting some other members to be trickling in a moment. But let me begin. My name is Bernie Sanders, congressman from the state of Vermont. On November 8th, in an election in which only 38% of the people voted, an election in which low-income people barely participated, an election dominated by big money and right-wing radio talk shows, the Republican Party won barely over 50% of the vote. With that so-called mandate, the Republicans in the House are now proposing legislation which, if enacted, would cause intense pain and suffering for tens of millions of Americans, most primarily the weakest and the most vulnerable people in our society. At a time when the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider, when the United States has the most unequal distribution of wealth in the industrialized world, when poverty is increasing, when 5 million American children go hungry, the Republicans are proposing to lower taxes on the wealthy and cut back severely on programs needed by the poor, the elderly, and our children. And what the Progressive Caucus is about is saying, no, you won't get away with that. At a time when the Cold War has ended, when all over the world people are thankful that the conflict that had gone on for generations between the Soviet Union and the United States is over, when Russia wants to join NATO, when American corporations are investing in tunes of billions of dollars in China, the Republicans want to increase military spending. And at the same time, they want to cut back on food stamps, which go often to hungry children, on the WIC program, on the school lunch and breakfast programs, on child care, on affordable housing, and on help for the blind and disabled. Frankly, I don't think that that is what America stands for. Tax cuts for the richest people, increased military spending when the Cold War is over, and causing more pain for the most vulnerable people in our society. Now, not only will many of us in the Progressive Caucus fight back against various aspects of the contract for America, but we also intend to bring forward alternative ideas that we think will make sense to the American people. We do not believe that our economy is booming when the real wages of American workers are in decline, when our manufacturing base is crumbling as we lose millions of jobs as corporations go to third world countries. So we think, among other things, that we need a jobs program in America to rebuild our crumbling physical and human infrastructure. We think that it is wrong that American workers be asked to continue working for $4.25 minimum wage. We think it is appropriate that the minimum wage be raised. We think we've got to re-examine our trade policy. Many of us think that we have got to change law to make it easier for workers to come into unions so that they are better able to stand up and protect their rights. But the bottom line of all of this is that there are some of us in Congress who do not believe that the American people want to see fewer and fewer, wealthier and wealthier people dominate our political and economic lives. And we are saying that some of us have not forgotten the pain that is being experienced by working people and middle-income people and poor people all over this country. Some of us are not bought and sold by corporate interests and big money interests. Some of us were elected to stand up and fight for those people who don't have the power. And what we are saying today is that ordinary Americans are not going to be forgotten, and some of us are going to stand here and fight with them. Now let me introduce a gentleman who has been a real fighter in this Congress for many years, Major Owens of New York.
We don't have the majority of the votes on the floor of the House. That's obvious, but we think we speak for the majority of the American people. This was an election where The oppressive minority, in my opinion, scored a knockout with a blitzkrieg, but you had about 36 to 37% of the people voting for House members, so less than half the people eligible to vote came out to vote, and they got a little more than half that, so there's no mandate. On the other hand, in the exit interviews at the polls, there was a clear message that was sent. We've all read summaries of those exit interviews. Some have chosen to get amnesia about one of the messages that the people sent, and that is that there's a great deal of anxiety about jobs and job security. White males are upset because they're not making enough money, but they have jobs, but other people are worried about losing the jobs they have, and then there are too many people who don't have jobs, they're just unemployed. So we'd like to be the voice of the majority, what I call the carrying majority that's still out there, the ordinary people who are concerned about their jobs. And at every level, we'd like to challenge the contract with America in terms of jobs, starting with welfare reform. The assumption is that there are jobs. That's a big lie. You know, I come from a district with a large numbers of welfare recipients, and every job you produce, I can produce 10 people who are ready to go to work right away. They'll stand in long lines to get jobs. So if there were jobs, there would be fewer people on welfare, and we welcome an effort to create more jobs so that people can get off welfare and go to work. They'd very much like to do that. Contract of America doesn't have a jobs program. Nobody is speaking about a jobs program, despite the fact that there's a clear anxiety about jobs in this country at this point. We're at the point where the global economics are taking over. There are going to be a lot of upheavals and changes, and what we need is a policy of job creation as a last resort by the federal government. This group will not be afraid to offer that as an alternative. I don't think it's absurd at all. I think we'd better get ready for a major problem, major upheaval, more unemployment, and producing jobs will deal with that problem, as well as many of the other problems that are talked about in the contract with America. Jobs are the number one issue. There's plenty of work to be done. Work is not a job unless somebody pays for it. So the federal government will have to have a jobs program. That's not big government, because 90% of what would be produced in the jobs program would be carried out by private industry. If you're going to build schools or take care of the transportation infrastructure, most of the things that are done through private sectors, not big government. Bureaucracies don't build schools or roads. So we need to, however, have a policy where we understand that the economy there are two economies. There's the economy for the people who are making big profits, the stockholders and Wall Street. That's one economy. For working people, there's another economy. And that economy for working people means they're losing more and more jobs while there's a big boom going on. It's great that the boom is going on. It means that the nation has wealth. Our wealth is increasing, by the way, faster than our expenditures for Social Security. So we don't have to worry about the future. The wealth is there. It's a matter of how we're going to tap that wealth, how we're going to use that wealth for all of the people. We propose to begin by providing jobs and putting an emphasis on jobs everywhere in this process. We challenge the people who want to cut waste. There's plenty of waste in government, plenty of waste, and they should start with the entitlements that are not means tested. Let's start with the farm program. You know, nobody talks about the crop insurance and the farm price subsidies and the farmers' home loan mortgages. Well, we're talking about $50 to $60 billion of entitlements that are not means tested. Nobody wants to talk about the waste that the contract with America proposes with respect to defense. We need to give people a peace dividend, a tax cut which is a peace dividend, cutting the expenditures for Seawolf submarines and aircraft carriers and unnecessary bombing, and build up of forces for engagements that are not going to be needed in the future. We speak for the carrying majority. They're blundering and unorganized, and they've allowed the oppressive minority to take over, but that's only a short-term venture. We think that if we are a clear voice, offering clear alternatives, we can win back what is necessary to control this Congress by providing the right leadership for the carrying majority.
Jerry Nadler is a congressman from the state of New York. Jerry.
Thank you very much. During this time of stepped-up and downright vicious assaults on low- and middle-income Americans, the role of the Progressive Caucus will become more crucial than even before. We agree with many of our colleagues and with many of the observations in the press that the electorate is angry. The election showed that. It's a fact that cannot be denied. Of course the voters are angry. Millions of our constituents remain unemployed. 80% of wage earners earn the same in real dollars or substantially less than they did 20 years ago. Even among those who are employed, millions do not have health care. Of course the electorate is angry. Will massive sweeping cuts in agencies that help the poor improve the lives of these Americans? I don't think so. Will establishing orphanages for the children of teenage mothers improve the lives of these Americans? I don't think so. Will a repeal of the assault weapons ban improve the lives of these Americans? I don't think so. And I venture to guess that the electorate doesn't think so either. I, for one, am confident that whatever part of the Republican contract may get passed into law, if any, will not, it's all a fraud, it will not help the basic problem in the economy of the American people, which is that jobs are too few, that good jobs are too few, that 80% of the people, as I said, are getting lower or equivalent wages than 20 years ago, that people are insecure about their own jobs, that 5 of the largest corporations in the United States have laid off 325,000 people in the last 4 years. We are proposing instead that the Democratic Party offer a real alternative so that when the electorate, the angry electorate, sees that the Republican proposals do not help them, they will turn to an intelligent, progressive alternative that we will offer instead of to something that no one can predict. An intelligent, progressive alternative is to create jobs, to create useful jobs, to invest in the infrastructure of this country, where we are investing in infrastructure and public infrastructure now at the rate of 1/12 of our competitors, of our economic competitors abroad. There's one other interesting fact. We are told very often that these facts, lowering wages, lack of good jobs, this is a result of the globalization of the economy, and it's just a fact we can't do much about. Well, the fact is that this bimodal distribution of income, where 20% are getting richer and 80% are getting poorer, is true in the United States, and it's true in Great Britain, which had the Thatcherite equivalent of the Reagan policies. In most of the rest of Western Europe, you don't have that great disparity in income, and you don't have stagnant or lowering wages. Countries can go in another course, and I am delighted to join in co-sponsorship of Congressman Owen's jobs bill for infrastructure, and I'm delighted to work with the Progressive Caucus to turn back the draconian and ill-conceived efforts that will be proposed by our colleagues in the 104th Congress, and instead work toward an agenda that will provide an alternative to truly improve the quality of life for Americans.
Maurice Hinchey is a congressman from New York State.
Well, we seem to be heavy on New York here today, but I think there's a lot of other people who are not here at this press conference from other parts of the country who support this initiative as well. I, too, would like to make the observation that there are a number of points, obviously, that were important about the previous election. Important among them is the fact that, first of all, most people stayed home. Most people didn't participate. Those who were eligible to vote did not participate. And those who did very often expressed their anger and anxiety. Secretary Reich has called this group of people the anxious class. And I think that that is an appropriate appellation for this group of people. They consist of the majority of Americans. They consist of most of the people that I represent in the 26th Congressional District in upstate New York. They are anxious about their future. They're anxious about their jobs. They're anxious about their ability to provide for their children. They're anxious about the ability of their children to get decent jobs and to have an increasing standard of living. And the fact of the matter is that for the last 20 years, the standard of living of the majority of Americans has either been stagnating or declining. Now, a lot of people have been making this observation. The Revolt of the Elites is a book that's out recently that makes that point, in addition to a number of other people who have made that point over and over again. But that point doesn't seem to have set in here in the Congress of the United States. That people are anxious, they are fearful, they are deeply concerned about themselves, about their families, and about their future, because their economic conditions are not improving, and in fact, they are declining. People have to work harder, they have to work longer. 2 members of the family have to work now to support what 1 member was able to support a couple of decades ago. And this condition is not improving. It is, in fact, getting worse day after day. It is the responsibility of this government to address these conditions. If we fail to address them, there will be additional unrest in this society. And that unrest will express itself at the polls and elsewhere. People are anxious and they are deeply worried about their future, and when those conditions exist, they are going to react in accordance with them. We need jobs. We need more jobs, and we need better jobs. We need jobs that are going to pay a living wage so that people who are employed can support themselves and their families. And what we're discussing here today is legislation which will provide for investment in America's future, the kind of investment that is being engaged in Japan, in Western Europe, and elsewhere throughout the industrialized world. Only in the United States do you find the failure of the government to recognize its responsibilities for transportation systems, for water distribution, sewer treatment facilities. All of these are essential to economic growth and development. In major parts of this country, water supply systems were laid down either late in the last century or early in this century. They're leaking at the rate of 50 to 80%. Sewer treatment plants are aging and becoming ineffective. Industry will not locate in areas where there is not adequate water supply and distribution systems, where there are not adequate sewer treatment facilities, where there are not adequate transportation facilities. This legislation that we are proposing will provide that kind of investment in the future of America so that we can produce the kind of jobs that people will need to support themselves. And we do need an increase in the minimum wage, and we do need an increase in investment of education, and this legislation addresses itself to those needs as well. Counteracting this, of course, even if we were successful, counteracting this, of course, is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve continues to move in a direction which is opposed to economic growth and development, which fails to recognize that the majority of Americans are working for less and that their standard of living is either stagnating or declining. That makes it even more necessary for the Congress of the United States to engage in these kinds of investment practices, to create a stronger nation internally, and one that will provide economic opportunity for all of our citizens. And I think that it's important for us, those of us who are of a progressive bent particularly, to provide an alternative to the initiatives of the new Republican majority, and also to form a nucleus around which a critical mass can evolve over a period of time. This is not going to happen overnight, obviously, but there has to be a beginning, and there has to be a central location. There has to be a nucleus around which this kind of activity can develop, and a majority can begin to reform itself based upon true progressive democratic principles.
Neil Abercrombie is Congressman from Hawaii.
Aloha, good morning, everybody. I come here as a Democrat representing the southernmost state in the Union. I hear that the South is going to the Republicans, but it's obviously not true. The southernmost state is Hawaii, and Hawaii won Democrat across the board. And we won across the board because we ran as Democrats. Harry Truman said, if you talk like a Republican and act like a Republican and run like a Republican, don't be surprised if people vote for a Republican. What we have to do is stop imitating the Republicans and start running as Democrats again. That means running on behalf of people, not running over people. Somebody said this is a contract on America. I think that's true. And I think that you can take the president's phrase about putting people first, and you can see what the Republican motto is: cut people first, cut their throats. That's what's going on right now. We have to take them on directly. You take welfare, so-called welfare. What about corporate welfare? Donald Trump gets to deduct 100% while he's bankrupt. He's told that he has to survive on $500,000 a month. $500,000 a month. You want to see swine at the trough? Just go on up to New York City and see Donald Trump. His big deal last year is picking on Indians because they're gambling. He wants to keep the Indians out of gambling. But I noticed all the Republican supervisors in Orange County couldn't wait to gamble with everybody's money out in Orange County. You can't even decipher. You'd have to be an astronomer to try and decipher what kind of derivatives those clowns were betting on in Orange County. And when the chief of the Board of Supervisors out there said, we don't even know where this money's coming from, but we're making millions. Now, that's the level that we're dealing with, and I think that's the way we have to take them on. Now, I'd be delighted. I hope we have these opportunities down in special orders to debate Mr. Gingrich and others in economics. It's amazing We have a new intellect now in the Speaker of the House. I hope we get a chance to debate. We'll talk about wages. We'll talk about people having a real chance. We'll talk about PACs. We'll talk about who gives money to who, and we'll see how it works out. When I was campaigning in the last election, you go before business groups and they said they want the deficit down. Well, we did that. We brought the deficit down in absolute numbers. We brought it down in percentages. Business people back home either didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it, or didn't care. They wanted to see it in their paychecks. They wanted to see it up front. What we should have done was pass this $60 billion investment in America 2 years ago, at the same time that we were passing the deficit reduction bill. I voted for that, and we carried out and did what we said we were going to do with the deficit. At the same time, we should have been making the investment. Now, how do the Republicans propose to do it? They want to slow down. Read this contract. See what it says. They want to slow down the deficit reduction. They want to increase investment. But where are they doing it? With Pentagon socialism. That's where they're going to do it. They're going to take care of the corporate pirates that are going to come in, not investing in the average ordinary American. Now, next time we get together, I'll have another sermon for you. I don't want to go on right now because I know you're probably anxious to ask us how we're going to pull all this off. Well, my attitude is, and I hope it's going to be the attitude of President Clinton when he takes that fistful of veto pens out, now we got him where we want him. And that's the way it should be. At long last, we're going to have a genuine battle on ideas, a genuine battle on where this country should be going and how we should get there. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for special orders. I can't wait for some of these bills to come up. I can't wait for the Republicans to start backing down. We were supposed to work 100 days straight. Now, the way I understand it, we're going to come in on Wednesday, maybe Thursday morning, and take the weekend off to go home and tell all the folks how good we're doing on that first 100 days. So much for that promise. I understand from listening to my good friends on the Republican side of the Rules Committee, we're supposed to have open rules. We want to have all the amendments. But I understand the first thing we're going to have is a closed rule. No, I never was for that in the first place, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm going to ask them what kind of rules they're going to have. Is the first rule going to be an open rule or not? And if it's not, then they back down from that one. And if we're going to have the Congress operate under the same laws as everybody else in the country, I expect that Speaker Gingrich then will welcome the union organizers from the Service Employees Union when they come in to organize his office. And I expect every Republican and every Democrat in the Congress will be welcoming the union organizers. And they'll be welcoming the OSHA people. I understand that some of our Republican friends want to sell one of our buildings. Well, do you think we're meeting the fire and safety standards in this room right now? Hell, if a fire broke out now in this room, well, everybody be trampled to death. That may result in general cheering and approbation throughout the rest of the country, but your families might have some reservations about it. Now, I think what's going to happen as soon as we apply all the laws and rules is we're going to have to spend billions more on more government buildings in order to take care of that cut staff that the Republicans say they have. So this is going to be fun. This is going to be informative. This is going to be great. This is going to give an opportunity to the American people to see some real politics in action, see some real joining of ideas, and I can't wait for it. And I look forward to Speaker Gingrich and the rest of the crew coming in there, getting in there down with us on the floor, and him coming out there saying, God, Neil, if I'd only realized beforehand, I'd have been with you.
Lydia Velasquez, Congresswoman from New York.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone, and I'm very proud to be here this morning to embrace this legislation, and I will welcome our Speaker and the President, Bill Clinton, to support this legislation. The American public in this country, they want to change welfare as we know it. Well, we are presenting today the real solution to welfare as we know it. Change will be the buzzword here in Washington this week. However, I am very happy that at least one institution will survive the conservative onslaughts of the 104th Congress, the Progressive Caucus. It will fall to congresspersons like those here this morning to keep alive the faith in a more just and equitable future. This caucus will also bear the responsibility of speaking truthfully about the new majority in Congress and their plan for the nation. Quite simply, the so-called contract with America is a hoax. It's supposed to be a program for working people and middle-income families, yet its prime beneficiaries will be the wealthy and the privileged. What the people need are jobs and security. What they get is the capital gains tax cuts, a giveaway for the rich. It's measures like the Job Creation and Invest in America Act that are the medicine for an ailing nation. Instead of the bankrupt trickle-down theories of the 80s, we offer a direct investment initiative for the 90s and the next century. 1 million jobs a year, a community development, school enhancement, occupational training, and health improvement. These are the remedies that working families have looking for to their government. Not rhetoric, just common sense solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia McKinney is a congresswoman from Georgia. Cynthia?
I'll just say that, as you can see, we're a pretty colorful bunch. But the bottom line is that the Republican contract on America is going to be challenged, and the Progressive Caucus is going to challenge them every step of the way. Now, the most important component in all of this, the bottom line, is that we have to take our message out to the people. And that means that we're going to have to organize in our own districts. We're going to have to enfranchise new voters and new people, bring them into the political process. What we saw was, some people are counting it as a mandate, but we really saw a lot of people choose to stay home. And we've got to bring those people in, and that's why this Progressive Caucus is going to go out into America with this message, with this challenge, and we're here to debate.
As you can see, this is a quiet and shy crowd, but if coaxed, they might be prepared to answer a few questions. Yeah.
What aspect of the contract will be challenged tomorrow on the first day of the 140?
Who wants to respond to that one? Tomorrow is well, I think tomorrow is going to be dealing with, among other things, the
Three-fifths.
taxes for 3/5.
Yeah, that's
All right. I think one of the clear goals of the Republicans is to protect the wealthy and to slash programs that working people, poor people, and middle-income people need. And one of the ways you do that is to say that it is impossible and make it very, very difficult to raise taxes. Now, at a time in which we already have an extremely regressive tax system, at a time in which corporations, for example, are contributing 50% less to the federal coffers than they did 40 years ago, and rich people have enjoyed huge tax breaks, what you want to do is protect those people and make it very difficult to pass taxes. Taxes in themselves are not an evil. The question is, where is the money going and who is paying? And I think I speak for everybody up here and many other people who say that it is not wrong to ask those people who can best afford to pay more in taxes to do so. But other people, Jerry,
I want to make a point on that also.
yeah.
Let me just add one thing on that. The Republican proposal is to require a 3/5 vote of the House and Senate to raise income taxes. Only income taxes, not excise taxes. So progressive taxes, you would need a 3/5 vote to raise. Regressive taxes that don't tax the rich more than middle and low income people, you would not need a 3/5 vote to raise. So excise taxes, perfect example. Secondly, we're going to be asking a lot of questions. For example, we're going to be asking a question, what about corporate taxes? Are we really saying that of the major corporations that paid less than $100,000 or no in income taxes last year, or no income taxes at all because of their tax loopholes, that we shouldn't raise, that it should take a 3/5 vote to raise their taxes? Do we really want to say that for the corporations that are busy exporting American jobs abroad, that it should take a 3/5 vote if we want to raise the tax on their earnings from abroad, so as to put a heavier burden on their desire to export American jobs abroad? Why should these require a special supermajority vote, which is almost impossible to attain, when to raise an excise tax, which everybody, low income, middle income, rich, pay the same? A regressive tax would only take a majority vote. And finally, and obviously, it's unconstitutional.
Well, I just want to make another point on this. What is being discussed here really is couched in the language of transferring responsibility back to the local level and decision-making activities back to the local level. Couched in that kind of language is actually, what is actually happening is passing the cost back to the local level. Now, anyone who has ever owned a home knows that the most oppressive tax is the real property tax, local real property and school taxes. Local real property and school taxes and local sales taxes across this country have been going up now for more than a decade. And you can trace it back to, among other things, the abolition of federal revenue sharing. When the federal government eliminated that act of transferring back to the localities some of the tax revenues that were raised at the local level, that forced local real property taxes up. And in the district that I represent, which consists largely of homeowners and people who pay real property taxes and school taxes, the most oppressive tax, the most hated tax, the most regressive tax, the most unfair tax is the property tax. And when the Republicans talk about having a 3/5 majority to deal with progressive taxes here at the federal level, what they're really talking about is raising local real property taxes back home.
Let me give you an exact example of that, because the question's a good one. What are we going to do tomorrow? We'll challenge each one of these things. I hope they're going to raise tomorrow, at least rhetorically, the question of the balanced budget amendment. They are going to balance the budget, all right, on the backs of local taxpayers, city, county, state taxpayers. If you just take their welfare proposal in Hawaii, I'll give you a specific example. The money, they would take approximately 19,000 children who are now receiving benefits of one kind or another away. They'd be left on their own in Hawaii. And I want to indicate over the past decade, we've had the lowest unemployment in the entire country. So it's not as if people weren't looking for jobs. We have a high cost of living in Hawaii for reasons that I'd be glad to go into detail with you. But the fact is that the cost of living is much higher than it is on the mainland. And so our employment nonetheless has been very, very high. We've had difficulties because of the high cost of living in seeing to it that people, even though they are working, are able to earn enough money to stay off of some kind of welfare assistance, food stamps, etc., or Section 8 housing, in which you receive a subsidy in order to be able to put shelter for yourself and your family. We have 19,000 off the rolls. The money that the Republican contract proposes to return would take care of 24 of those kids if they had to go into an orphanage, if they had to go into foster care. I have some experience with that, having written the legislation on that and headed the committee that dealt with that in Hawaii during the 1980s, during the Reagan era. And I can tell you that there is not a surfeit of foster parents out there, qualified foster parents. They're very difficult situations to deal with, and the amount of money that would be coming back would inevitably force the people of Hawaii to tax themselves in order to take care of the Republican transfer of responsibility without a commensurate transfer of funding.
Try to keep it brief, okay? Yes.
Given the fact that you don't have a majority anymore and the Republicans are going to be bringing up everything tomorrow under closed rules, is there anything that you can actually do other than your debate, what time they give you for debate, to block any of these things? Do you have any other strategy than that?
Well, we will attempt to seriously challenge that kind of provision, the 3/5 for the passage of any tax bill, because that cuts away at the one man, one vote provision. If you can do that on any legislation, then they'll do it again on some other favorite piece of legislation. We can't allow that to happen. We'll do what we can with our numbers, but the important thing is the message to the American people. Newt Gingrich, 10 years ago, was in the minority, very much so, not only in the minority in general terms, but in his own party, he was in the minority. He put forth ideas and clearly was able to rally a core of people around him to gain some momentum to push those ideas within his own party. It's important that Democrats offer an alternative to the American people and let them know exactly what's going on. And you can only do that by fighting vigorously on the floor of the House. We hope our leadership will fight vigorously, but if they don't, we certainly will be there to wage the fight.
Question for Ms. McKinney. Y'all have been talking about some of the specifics that you'd like to pursue. Your fellow Georgian, the incoming speaker, has been saying over and over again, though, that 40 years of big government, big spending hasn't worked. It's time to try something new, something different. What do you say to that?
Well, everything that he says hasn't worked, there are some things that haven't worked. But there are some things that have worked. And we have to acknowledge the fact that what Mr. Gingrich did was produce a marketing tool. And that tool was the contract with America. And with that tool, and of course his special interest slush fund that he had on the side to finance his Republican majority, he was able to achieve exactly what he wanted to achieve. Our role now is to look at what he is doing, to agree with those things that are right, and to vehemently disagree with those things that are wrong, to take to the American people the alternatives, the differences in what it means to be a Democrat and what it means to be a Republican, and to spell it out very clearly. And of course, to say it in words that are clear and understandable to the people.
I'd like to make a point about that. 40 years of big government. If you listen to Newt Gingrich, you would believe, if you knew nothing about the way the American government works, that that government is controlled exclusively by the House of Representatives. Of course, we know that that isn't true. This big government was presided over by the administrations of Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Bush. What were they doing all the time that they were in the White House when all of this big government activity was going on? That gives the lie to the Gingrich propaganda. Gingrich focuses only on those aspects of the American experience that seem to substantiate his peculiar point of view. And he sets aside the majority of that experience. He sets aside the fact that we've had all of those Republican administrations and that they have systematically and conscientiously dismantled the war on poverty, for example, created back in the Johnson administration. They would have people to believe that the programs enacted in the 1960s in this country have run continuously through right up to 1995. Of course, we know that isn't the fact. We know what Nixon did to them. We know what Bush and Reagan and Ford did to those programs. He wants people to forget that during the decade of the 1980s, 6 years of that decade, the Republican Party controlled not only the White House, but the United States Senate as well. So let's be careful about what we let Gingrich get away with. He is very discriminating in what he wants the people to understand and believe. But it's our responsibility to give them the full truth and the complete set of facts.
I'd like to just add that what we are really about to see, I think, is special interest anarchy, where these people want to come in and just tear everything down, and everything doesn't deserve to be torn down. Let me also just say that the Republican, Newt Gingrich, talks about the elites of this country. Well, he represents the elites of this country, and the Republican Party represents the elites of this country. What about the rest of us? And so at least within the Progressive Caucus, we've got 30 or 40 of us who are concerned about the rest of us, and we're about to fight for them.
I also would like to add, you know, when you mention new ideas coming from Gingrich, I don't see those new ideas. We have to go back to the 12 years of Ronald Reagan and Bush. You know, what they did was to eliminate a lot of social programs in this country at the expense of working families and children and poor women in this country. And also, the only thing that we got from them was to quadruple the deficit. And that's what we're going to get again.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about, you talked having 30 or 40 people in the caucus. That's not even a majority of the Democratic Party in the House. What type of internal debate do you expect to have with your fellow House members? We see the DLC, and we see what's happening in the White House, and they're not on the same track as you guys are.
Let me answer that in two different ways.
I know you're not a member of the
I'm not.
Party, but everyone behind you.
I'm innocent. But let me suggest respectfully that you're missing the main point. And I think Major Owens made that point a little bit earlier. The truth of the matter is, in my view, that we are going to change America and restore sensible priorities so the government works for ordinary people rather than the wealthy and the powerful, not by backroom dealings and caucuses and meetings in this building. We're going to bring about that change when millions of elderly people stand up and say, no, you're not going to slash Medicare, and poor people stand up and say, no, you're not going to slash food stamps, and working people say, no, you're not going to lower taxes for the rich and raise my property taxes or my health care expenses. So ultimately, while we have got to fight in almost guerrilla warfare day after day against every one of these, or virtually every one of these proposals which comes down the pike, while we have got to present and provide intelligent alternatives, perhaps the most important thing that we can do is say to tens of millions of Americans who don't vote, who don't participate in the political process, that we are with you and that we want you to stand up and to fight for your kids and your parents and your own lives, and that we want to work with you, that maybe we can be a little bit of light in the darkness in telling people, don't give up on the political process. Because when working people and elderly people and poor people give up, we know who fills the vacuum. And the people who fill the vacuum are the rich and the powerful who contribute not only to the Republican Party, in all due respect, I might say, to the Democratic Party, to candidates all over America. That's the group of people who are running the politics and economics of this country.
We don't concede that we have no power here in the back halls and smoke-filled rooms of the House either. The Progressive Caucus members are members of other groups. Black Caucus is represented here, and we expect to provide a clear and forceful alternative and have it endorsed by the Black Caucus. The Hispanic Caucus is represented here. We expect to go to them and have it endorsed. Women's Caucus is represented. We expect to drive for a majority of the Democrats in the kind of things, the kind of alternatives that we propose.
There's one other element on this, and I think this is where you're going to have to take the question to the president, as opposed to us, the House per se. If there's a veto, you have to get 2/3. They were talking before about 3/5. Try getting 2/3. Mr. Bush exercised his veto pen, and as he should. If that's what he believed, he's the president of the United States. That's the way the Constitution is set up. You exercise the veto, you have to overcome with a 2/3 vote. It's one thing to have the majority. It's another thing to be able to get a 2/3 vote in the Congress if the president vetoes a bill. And that's where when you get 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, and 90 people together, when you can talk legislation with them. And let's face it, up here, a lot of people came into this Congress bragging about the fact that they didn't know anything about legislation, that they don't know anything about the committees that they're being assigned to, that the less they know, the easier it is to vote. I expect that that's true. But there's a lot of us in here understand that legislation requires us. We are duty-bound and obligated to speak with our fellow members here in the Congress, not all of whom we agree with on every issue and every aspect. It's a little bit arrogant to think that you're going to get people to vote with you for your reasons. The essence of a good legislator is to get people to vote with you for their reasons. And so what we're going to do is try to appeal to our fellow members of Congress and to the President of the United States that asking him first to exercise his veto pen, exercise his veto power, and then we in turn will appeal to other members, both of our Democratic caucus and the Independent caucus, whenever we can get him to sit down with us, and to Republican friends, to ask them then to consider the question of the veto and whether or not we can appeal to the interests that they see, the political and legislative interests that they see with respect to whether or not they want to overcome that veto. That's the real key, the veto pen.
A bit of a subject change, but what is on this Congress's agenda when it comes to the abortion debate? In light of the recent shootings in Massachusetts, what should this Congress do?
But let somebody else. You're shy.
What this Congress should do and what it will do may be different things. What it should do, obviously, is to strengthen the freedom of access to clinic bill, to clinic entrances bill that was passed last year. We should be asking the administration to increase the involvement of the FBI in investigating these things. We have to regard this as a war on terrorism. Certain elements of the anti-abortion movement, not most of it, but some elements, have adopted a frankly terroristic strategy, no different from some of those who were blowing up the World Trade Center in Manhattan and other acts of terror. And we have to fight this, regard it as a war on terrorism, because we cannot permit, even the abortion issue aside, we cannot permit anybody in this society to decide that they, because they have a superior moral insight or a superior intelligence to everybody else in the country, are going to determine the policy of the country regardless of what the majority of the people say, the majority of the Congress says, and so forth. And that's what we're going to be trying to do. And I would suspect that even many of the anti-choice members will support cracking down on terrorism, because to allow this to go on, to allow that fringe of a movement or that element of a movement to get its way, is obnoxious and intolerable in a democratic society, and also would encourage people who feel strongly about other issues to do the same.
So, Cynthia McKinney wanted to respond before.
I just wanted to say that one way to put an end to this that won't cost any money, in addition to the things that Representative Nadler outlined, but that won't cost any money, is for those who have been hyping the hype to just be quiet, to sit down, be quiet, and stop this anti-choice, anti-woman hysteria that has taken over some of the airwaves. Another thing is that those people who are in leadership positions in the Republican Party who happen to also be anti-choice need to speak out and say that this is not acceptable behavior. We do not condone this, and they need to speak out against it. I haven't, quite frankly, heard our speaker to be speaking out against it.
And also, we encourage the religious leaders in this country to speak out about this issue too.
Yeah,
They
let
have
me
to
just,
take
yes.
responsibility.
You talk about pressuring your fellow Democrats, pressuring the White House. The question is there anybody in the Democratic leadership, whether it's in the White House or whether it's Dick Gephardt in the leadership or even in the Senate, that's listening? Is anybody really listening to you? Do you have any evidence?
Dave Vanier, to the best of my knowledge, is a member of the Progressive Caucus.
And is anybody at the White House listening to you?
We have met and will meet with the president. We think that some of the things that Secretary of Labor Reich talked about when he talked about corporate welfare, what he was saying is before you throw poor children into orphanages and cut food stamps, look at what the rip-offs that corporations are getting. So we think Reich is there. But I think, again, to the degree that we are forceful, we're going to be able to rally a lot of decent members of Congress to do the right thing rather than go over to the right because they're not hearing a progressive point of view.
The White House is too scared. The White House is scared. It's moved to the right. They give tax cuts and so on and so forth, the DLC. I mean, that seems to be the movement of the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton. Why do we expect they're going to listen to you?
Because we think that in grassroots America, we represent a hell of a lot more working people and poor people than the DLC does.
So does that mean, just following up on that, have your numbers gone up and down? Do you have a count just how many members you'll have this
We have
Congress?
Approximately 30 members.
And how many did you have before the election?
Approximately 30 members, but
So-
we haven't done our active organizing. I think the main thing is not just, well, we actually lost one or two.
You haven't lost any.
I think the main point is, it is perceived in America today that there is a vacuum in terms of responding to the Rush Limbaughs and right-wing Republicans. What we intend to do is not only stand up and fight, but present alternative ideas. Work with the unions, work with the women's organizations, work with the environmental groups. And if we can rally grassroots America, the people here are politicians. They listen. And I think they would rather move in a fair and honest way rather than in a right-wing way. And our job is to rally that public opinion.
Are there any?
All right, we've got maybe just 2 more minutes.
Are there
because they're
any,
gonna-
are there any of the reforms that the Republicans are going to be proposing tomorrow? You mentioned the 3/5 rule, which you will oppose, but what about some of the rules changes that they're proposing for Congress? are you going to support?
Do you want to be more specific about that?
Well, for example, they have a whole raft of rules changes, including not changing the congressional record, not changing committee transcripts, open committee meetings, and also this big bill to apply labor laws and affirmative action laws to Congress. Would you all support those measures?
I'm going to believe the House.
Let me say one thing. Some of what they're doing is not I mean, the uncontroversial things that you're mentioning are nice housekeeping, and I would be surprised if too many people oppose them. This bill to apply most of the laws to the Congress, for instance, which is now part of the contract with America, the Republicans were instrumental in blocking last year after the House passed it. The Sweat Shays bill. After the House passed it, the Republicans blocked it in the Senate because they simply didn't want the Democrats to get credit for anything. So that's a Democratic proposal, which we passed last year, and of course we're not going to oppose it this year.
Okay, maybe last question. Yes, young lady over there. Ellen.
Given everything that you've said on various issues, why isn't your jobs bill already dead on arrival?
I think there is no question that on a number of issues we have an uphill fight. But I think as others have made the point, just because tomorrow you don't have a majority does not mean to say you don't come forward with ideas that are right and which make sense to ordinary working people. That's how change takes place. To my mind, the overwhelming majority of American middle class and working people are terribly concerned about the decline in our standard of living, the exodus of decent paying jobs to China, Malaysia, and elsewhere. It is insane, to my mind, that Amtrak has just thrown 5,000 workers out on the street when everybody here knows we've got to significantly improve our mass transportation and our rail system. That affects Vermont, virtually every state in the Union. Washington, D.C., as I understand it, is talking about cutting back on libraries. And at the same time, you have politicians saying how important it is to have an educated society. What are we talking about when we're saying we don't have monies to maintain libraries, whether we're laying off teachers? So I think we have the ideas. We're going to fight as hard as we can. We're going to rally support outside of this building and inside this building, and we are going to prevail.
We have a president who's still learning, and he needs to hear our voices.